Crisis PR basically refers to the work done by a communications team to manage and shape the public perception and reputation of a company in the best way possible, either before a crisis, when they're in the midst of a crisis, or after a crisis. Basically, we want, when there is negative sentiment around a company, to be able to rebuild trust and make sure that the public knows that this isn't going to be a recurring problem. So negative press could be anything from a faulty product, a lawsuit coming to light, a gray area comment made by an executive. It could be aggressive competitor tactics. It could really be a lot of different things, and they can also appear in an article in the media, or it could be somebody making, say, a TikTok video or posting something about it on Instagram, and then it may be spiraling with comments and reposts and people taking on their own interpretation of that. It can spread really quickly. With social media, things kind of go fast, especially if it originates on social media, because then people will be retweeting or reposting, people will be commenting, and there'll be a bunch of comments. And then usually if it's getting a bunch of attention on social media, the media publications will pick up on it, and articles will be written by reporters. If it begins as an article, that also can spiral pretty quickly depending on the nature of the article, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible to mitigate it and make sure that it doesn't go too far out of control. And that's where the crisis communication and crisis PR will come in. I think the most common mistake is going to one end of, I'm going to call it a seesaw. I think it's really a balancing act, because you don't want to move too slowly. Obviously you want any message you put out into the market to be thought out, but you don't want to take too long to think it out before putting it out, because this delay will not look good, which is why you kind of want to prepare beforehand. But you also don't want to put a message out too quickly and have it not be concise and thought out enough, where it just seems like you're slapping something on to slap it on. So I think that you really just have to find the balance, and that's where some companies will get tripped up, either moving too fast and not saying the right message, or moving too slowly and not addressing it soon enough before it spirals. Something that helps any company turn it around when there is a problem is transparency. That's the biggest thing. So this is an example from a while ago. It's from the 80s, but this case study has kind of always stuck with me. Johnson & Johnson, they came across an issue where Tylenol killed 7 people. And obviously that kind of caused an outrage. People were really scared about buying Tylenol from Johnson & Johnson because there was cyanide in it, they found. And they could have attributed it to a one-off or something going wrong with just that batch of making the products. But instead of doing that, they really addressed the problem head on. They sent out communications to their consumers. They took the Tylenol off the shelves. They even established a hotline where consumers who were concerned could call and just ask questions and make sure they understood everything. And, this was at the detriment of millions of dollars for Johnson & Johnson. But instead of worrying about that, they made sure that consumers know that they cared about their health. And that transparency and that quick reaction really made all the difference. And obviously Johnson & Johnson is still huge today. So I think that's a good example. Also, more recently, Slack in 2022, they had the app crash, I think, for around 5 hours in the middle of a workday on a Tuesday. And especially after COVID, a lot of people work remote. And so Slack is a really, really big part of the workday, and it crashing for 5 hours was not great. People were not happy. But what Slack did was they kept They kept users constantly kind of in the know about what they were doing to fix it. They kept them in the know about even problems that were going on while they fixed it in a very light tone, but also serious. So making sure people didn't freak out with the way they were conveying their messages because of the tone they were using, but also being transparent and serious and making it clear that they were taking this seriously and fixing the problem. And that worked really well for them. It's important to have a crisis plan in place before a crisis occurs, kind of like I was saying earlier, because once it happens, you want to be able to move as quickly as possible. But the way you move and the message that you put out, you want to be built out already. You want the message to be conveying what you as a company or brand want to be saying to the public, which is why it's so important to develop key messages beforehand. It's also important to identify where your potential vulnerabilities are. In that way, you can kind of predetermine where there might be negative sentiment or something might go wrong in the future. And you have those key messages and you know exactly how you want to handle it. And that way you're getting a good message and you are also aligned across departments on how things will be handled. So there's no confusion in the midst of the chaos if a crisis happens.